Well, welcome. I'd like to invite anyone out there who's watching or here in the chambers. Thank you for being here and attending September 25th, 2025 City Council Budget Committee. So we will begin, and this is now our fourth this month, fourth in a row. So if you're just tuning into this one, I would encourage you to watch the three previous. And so we'll begin with administration. Jennifer Gregerson.
All right, thanks, Council President. I'm just gonna kind of lay out the role of speakers for the night. So the mayor is gonna kick us off with some comments. Director Weber will present the community outreach update to you, and Director Briantes will go through the information she has on budget balancing measures. So, Mayor, why don't you go next? Thanks.
Sure, thank you. Just really first want to thank our team who's been working hard to balance this budget. It's been a huge amount of work, especially this year, with some of the difficult decisions and challenges that we're facing. I also wanted to thank the council. The meetings I've had with each of you and the feedback has been really helpful, and I appreciate it and look forward to the continued collaboration work as we finalize the 2025 budget. I'm not going to deliver my full budget address tonight, don't worry, but I wanted to just share a few highlights before Heidi comes up and presents the preliminary budget balancing update. On the general government side of things, we have to discontinue or reduce some lines of work that we really know our residents benefit from, but that we can't afford to continue. But by taking a strategic approach to these reductions, we're really protecting the resources needed to deliver essential services that we can't reduce. The budget reflects our priorities of maintaining public safety services, strengthening our economy, investing in our infrastructure, and supporting quality of life. And I know council shares those priorities and our residents do as well. Please remember, as you're looking at this tonight, it's still preliminary. We may need to make changes as we can continue to work through the workforce reductions that we've discussed previously. Updates to the budget balancing that we're sharing tonight were really difficult, painful decisions, and we're facing the structural deficit caused by factors outside of our control, and we still have a budget deficit in 2026 and beyond. But we're incorporating a number of permanent reductions that will hopefully help address that in the long term and reduce that future deficit in outgoing years. So again, just wanted to thank you all and thank the team. All right, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm just going to be covering the community feedback and process that my team conducted following the August 6th Prop 1 ballot failure. So as you know, and as we've been discussing, we're facing a large deficit, just like other cities, and Mayor Franklin wanted to ensure that we heard from the Everett community, making sure that we were able to reflect our community's priorities during this difficult process. Our focus when we reached out to the community was really intentional. We did not ask people what they would like to see stay and what their priorities were to keep. We asked them where they wanted to see cuts, or I think wanted is a really strong word, but where if we had to cut, they would choose to do that. And so we were really strategic in that because it's really easy to say what you want to see stay. It's really hard to say what you want to see go, and that was the feedback that we really wanted, so that was the question that we asked on purpose. And I'll tell you, as someone who attended all of the community meetings, read through all the results, and fielded conversations with many community members, as I know all of you have as well, people really struggle to answer this, and they want to say, oh, I'd feel comfortable cutting this, but I really want to see this stay. And so you could tell that the community was struggling with this decision as well. So we developed a survey. We advertised this with our neighborhood groups on social media, through our boards and commissions, through staff word of mouth, through our partners that we connect with and stay connected with, who share information to different groups across the city. We conducted our first community meeting that was staff-led at the Weyerhaeuser Room on August 20th. Our second was at the South Branch Library on August 22nd. And then Mayor Franklin and Council President Schwab hosted an in-person, all of these were in person, but theirs was in person as well, meeting on August 26th, where they heard directly from the community as well. And then Mayor Franklin also met with our neighborhood leaders in early September to ensure we heard from them directly, and also with our diversity board to hear their input as well. So as I mentioned, in conjunction with these community meetings, we also launched a community survey, and we accepted feedback via mail, via online, and then we also passed out those surveys at our community meetings so people could hand them back to us if that's how they felt most comfortable providing feedback on this process. In our short time, in our short time, we consider 482 responses very successful. And the responses were mostly between people ages 35 to 54 years old. Nearly 90% of the respondents reported to live in Everett. And most responses were from people who lived in District 1. I don't think that is probably a surprise to you. That's where we get the majority of our engagement. As you can see here, people did respond to that hard question: where do you believe we should consider cuts? And it started with neighborhood groups, and then it was parking enforcement, business support, police community outreach, Everett Arts and Culture, public information and communications, customer service, code enforcement, library hours, and library services. And so this was just kind of the graph of what they voted on, put into a high-level graphic for you to look at. Yeah.
Just real quick, were there other options that they looked at, or was that the sum of the options?
Yeah, we offered, I think, 23 different categories, and so
Okay.
these were just the top.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then we asked them to identify opportunities for budget reductions in the coming years, and this is just a word web of those open-ended answers that we got of words most used and least used. So just a different way to look at that information. We asked them to please rank priorities from most important to least important. Most people said that a safe community was the most important thing for them. I don't think that is a surprise to any of you either, as you've all doorbelled in our community. And then we also reached out and asked the community, what are the amenities that you most frequently use? And this was the information that we got back. So parks, libraries, streets and roads, events, our police department, our fire department, code enforcement, sidewalks, parking enforcement, downtown business and restaurants, in that order. And you can see the drop-off there between streets and roads and events very much tapers down there. And then we also, at the same time, conducted a staff survey so we could get new ideas from our staff members. And this was an open-ended box, so we just gave people like 200 characters. Please let us know, what your ideas might be. And the top three were reduced staffing costs through shortened work days, work weeks, or unpaid time off, reduced staffing by cutting or consolidating positions, and then reduced printing. Oh, there was one more slide. And then there is a missing slide. And then the missing slide is basically we listed out the budget reductions of revenue ideas from our employees. And so I think there's about 40 different ideas listed, and I think if you have that, so you can see that in your packets. And so from here, our plan is to share these results with the community so they can see where their input went and what other people said and what rose to the top for the community. We're going to continue communications and community engagement and public education about the budget and how city finances work. And then later, you will start seeing icons on some of our materials that will show if something is funded from the general fund, grant funded, federally funded, an enterprise fund or something like that. And we're going to start using those on most of the things that we produce that highlight a project or something that uses city resources, so that people can start understanding where money is coming from, just to help in the long-term plan of helping people better understand.
And I'll jump in, and that's really important. You saw on the word salad, as well as kind of some of the suggestions for cuts, there were offerings of things that weren't general fund, golf courses or, different other projects that are not funded by the general fund. And so continuing that education ongoing, I think, is important for folks to understand.
Yeah, and I think from the community meetings, we saw too that people want more information. And so trying to figure out how to provide that without, going out and meeting every constituent one-on-one and helping them understand things. So if you have questions, I'll take them.
Questions? Comments?
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Good to see you again. Yeah, I do find it surprising that on the slide about what services people use most, two of the highest chosen selections were libraries and events, but then on the slide about what should be cut, libraries and events is also one of the top ranking responses. So I think it goes to show what a balancing act it is to balance between what people use and what people want to cut when it's the exact same thing. So so we got that to look forward to.
And even in our neighborhood groups, as the mayor met with our neighborhood leaders, they're saying we want investment in neighborhoods, but we understand if that's where we have to see cuts to save these other things. So even people who are utilizing, the library and things like that also may be willing to cut them, which is very interesting, like you pointed out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something, when the survey results first came back, I was surprised to see that neighborhood support was the top ranking response for where cuts could be. So it got me thinking about ways that neighborhood support could still be preserved, but also find more efficiencies. And to me, I think it makes a lot of sense to shift to more of a district approach to neighborhood meetings instead of just 15 to 19 neighborhood meetings per month. It's just 5. And then our police, our fire, our council members only have 5 meetings to go to over the course of the month instead of the bulk of it. And then at each meeting, there could be time for updates from each of the individual neighborhoods or breakout groups, or just some sort of a reimagining of our neighborhood system, but within the structure of districts to help provide some more efficiencies. So that's my good idea for the day, and I'm gonna go home now. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, and I think it's a great way just to shrink up staff time and attention, and also just resources for the whole city and city staff. So
And
something
those
to
are
consider.
conversations that we continue to have as well. And I'll, just for a little bit of backstory, as soon as the redistricting process happened, we had a large neighborhood community meeting at the school district and talked about the idea of what moving to more of a district model could look like. And I would say a lot more conversation and a lot more work has to be done to get our neighborhoods there to where they feel like they're going to be given the priority or the time that they're getting now as individual neighborhoods. And so I think with time and more buy-in, we could get there. But at this time, I don't think our community wants to make that transition. But we do keep talking about it, and we do keep bringing it up. And so I'd love to talk to you more about that idea and what you think might help us transition there.
Sure. I think at this point, I don't think we have a choice but to find that efficiency and have the neighborhoods join in now. I mean, it's been almost 4 years with districts. It's time to make some of these shifts towards a district approach to engagement and involvement. So I see it as more of just making the change and having folks come along with it than just prolonging it and stressing out services even more.
Councilmember Zarlingo.
I guess I see the point with respect to efficiency, but I come from a neighborhood that started years before the city's neighborhood groups, probably in the late 1980s, and is an independent organization. And I suspect to some degree they'd like to stay that way, or will advocate for that independence. So I'm certainly willing to go forward with this in terms of discussing with the neighborhoods. And I can see we've considered some consolidation or combination to try to get a critical mass. So I see benefits in it, but I also see that the neighborhood organizations, especially where we're talking about cutting some of our assistance or support of them, may not look at it quite the same way.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting abolishing neighborhoods at all. I love my neighborhood. I know neighborhoods love their neighborhoods as well, but just the meeting portion of it each month, to have that, instead of it being 19 duplicative meetings, it's just 5, which I think would save a lot of resources.
I have a comment. First of all, thanks for your ideas, especially at trying to educate our community on where the funding comes from these projects. Maybe that's something we should try to incorporate more here at this meetings when we talk about expenditures. Make that more clear. So that's a really good idea. Thank you for that. Also, you mentioned something about communication, and want to share some of your ideas and how you wanted to communicate more of what we're going through?
So we're just narrowing our focus as a comms team to really try to follow up on the budget process, and what you all are doing to get through this really hard time, so that the community understands what is being reduced, where they can see reductions, and what that's going to look like for them. And so our plan is to follow your process and pay attention so that we can help the community follow it as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Bader?
Just one real quick comment. I mean, I know it was a very, as robust a process in terms of getting community input as you can do in the short time frame we had. But I appreciate all the comments we got, but with 100 and almost 20,000 residents, and businesses and people who come into work too, who I think in some ways are our constituents as well. I think we're really still challenged now as council members to kind of channel what did the other 119,500, folks in Everett want us to do. And I know that's why we were elected, but still, it's. I think I just want to note the challenge we have ahead of us, despite the great input we got from the people who did connect with it. So thanks for doing it, though. Thanks for all the extra time that you guys invested in doing
Thank you.
And to Councilmember Bader's, so we probably need to move to Heidi real quick here, but to Councilmember Bader's point, I encourage all of you to do what I'm doing right now, which is every single conversation I'm having with a constituent, a business, a group, I talk about the budget. Everyone loves to talk about budgets, but I talk about the budget, and I talk about the fact that we are making reductions and where we're considering reductions, and I'm getting that immediate feedback, which all of that up until now I've incorporated into what I'm doing. And so I've taken what I'm hearing into the budget that you guys will be working from. And then if you are doing the same process, hopefully you're hearing similar messages, but you'll hear others as well. So good luck.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I had one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I just want to respond to Councilmember Ryan's suggestion, and I've always felt that strongly that we need to have district meetings, and how that works out, I don't know, but the council provided $100,000 of the ARPA funding last year to the neighborhood. So as we get moving forward, it would be good to know what that's going to do, and how that fits into the budget. Addressing some of the needs that they express to us, and making sure that happens. So that combination.
We did our elections for council and neighborhoods just earlier this week. So our chair, vice chair, and team is set, and they're going to dive into that conversation around that money actually next week. And so as soon as I know something, I'll put it either in the council digest for you, or ask Mayor Franklin how I should disseminate that information.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Who's up next? Welcome.
Before we get started on the balancing measures, the $100,000 that was allocated to the Council of Neighborhoods is incorporated into the '24 budget. Should that not be spent, that will then be reappropriated or carried forward in the 2025 budget through the First Amendment of next year.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. So tonight, we will provide you with an update on the 2025 general government budget development. It might be helpful to hold until the end of the short slide presentation, or hold questions until the end. However, I will pause between slides should you want to ask any questions.
Are you sure?
Yes. I'd like to begin by sharing the general government six-year forecast as of July. This was presented to council during the Budget and Finance Committee held on September 4th. Prior to balancing the budget, the forecast shows the starting deficit in 2025 was $12.6 million. This was the starting deficit after accounting for a $7 million budget variance. As a reminder, the 2025 proposed budget, like the previous year's budgets, incorporate a budget variance, which represent the net of revenues over or under budget, plus under expenditures from the prior year. As an example, the 2023 budget variance is applied to 2025 to help achieve a balanced budget. Without this budget variance, our starting deficit in '25 would have been $19.6 million, as the table on the right of this slide indicates. Looking into future years, after already accounting for an estimated $7 million annual budget variance, deficits were projected to grow from $16.8 million in 2026 to $35.4 million in 2030. As depicted in the chart, the deficit is expected to worsen each year. After I share the preliminary balancing measures for the '25 budget, I will then show you how these deficit numbers have changed. As you may have seen in the news recently, many other cities and even school districts are also faced with addressing deficits and adopting balanced budgets. Property tax is their single largest and most stable revenue source. But the 1% limit on annual increases has deeply strained many budgets. The community relies on their local governments to provide services that they care about. However, these services appear to expand every year due to population growth and changes to the community's needs. Despite the recent economic growth, current revenues are not enough for many local governments to make those critical investments and keep basic core services working for all residents. We begin balancing measures with current labor reductions estimated at $4.6 million. Labor reductions are achieved through the Voluntary Separation Incentive Program, layoffs, partial layoffs, furloughs, elimination of vacant positions, and a few transfers to non-general government departments. The next few slides detail the departments with labor reductions and the potential impact to those services. We reduce labor in city council and mayor offices. These cuts may delay response time to address residents' requests. There will be less support available to council members and administration, and this may also reduce leadership's ability to pursue new initiatives. We reduce labor for our internal support teams. These cuts may delay response time to address internal requests and reduces support levels within these operating departments. Another example of impacts includes possible delays in the recruitment and hiring of vacant positions that are needed to support residents' needs. We reduce labor in the Communications and Engagement Department. This impacts the team's capacity to keep the public informed and engaged. It reduces social media presence, publications, and community outreach, and suspends Everett TV programming. We reduce labor in the Economic Development Division. This reduces the capacity to recruit and retain businesses. Police, emergency management, and code enforcement are also experiencing labor reductions. To maintain and preserve current levels of response services, these cuts are felt more deeply in police administration, desk officer positions, and parking and code enforcement. We reduce labor in parks and community services by eliminating the park ranger program. This will delay response time and limit the ability to address some park issues. We reduced labor in facilities and property management. This will delay custodial services, which may include public restroom cleaning, building maintenance, and repairs. Labor cuts to the library reduces hours of operation, and it could also result in reductions in areas such as the adult services program or other programming that's yet to be determined. And lastly, for labor, we did eliminate some of the employee benefit programs. The next set of balancing measures impact department maintenance and operations, or M&O budgets, which have been reduced by approximately $1.9 million. We eliminated most departments' 2% annual M&O growth. In the last decade, departments' M&O budgets have remained stagnant with little to no growth. And this is very difficult, as we do know the price of goods and services that are purchased by local governments rise much more quickly than consumer goods and services. That means it's getting more expensive to buy the same things while at the same time M&O funding is being reduced. On top of cutting the 2% annual growth, there are additional cuts. We reduced street overlay projects dramatically. This is a balancing measure that we will not be able to sustain long term. A reduction in the library's materials budget will decrease the number of new books the library can purchase in both physical and e-book formats. Waiting lists for popular titles in all formats will become longer. It may also be necessary to temporarily freeze purchases for physical media collections. That includes DVDs and music CDs. Additionally, the program that funded hotspot loans for those needing internet access outside of the library will be eliminated. We reduced Parks and Community Services capital program budget, which funds small repairs to playgrounds and other park amenities. Council and administration have also reduced their M&O budgets. We suspended the Arts and Cultural Grant Program from the Municipal Arts Fund budget. Although we continue to invest in human needs-related programs, the budget has been reduced significantly. There is some funding that remains for human needs grants, Claire's Place support, and the VOA Community Center contract, which will now be funded by the Senior Center Reserve Fund in 2025, which is a non-general government fund. And lastly, we reduced the supplies and materials budget that supports operations in clerks, procurement, and all other finance teams. There are significant cost increases anticipated for several items that must be funded by the general government with little to no revenue support. The table shows the average cost in the last 3 years, the 2024 original budget, as well as the 25 proposed. Notable M&O costs include the general government's contributions to fund general insurance premiums, workers' compensation, central dispatch and radio services, jail fees, as well as the Indigent Defense Program. Other balancing measures includes the 2023 budget variance, as mentioned in the first slide. Suspending general government contributions to the police and fire Left One pension funds. A one-time federal grant award totaling $4.5 million to support community development's alternative response program. A portion of this grant will be spent in 2024 and presented in budget amendment number 3. But this line reflects the staffing portion that was used in balancing. It's recommended to use a portion of lodging tax revenues to fund city special events, including the associated labor and M&O, while continuing to support the external grant program. Animal Reserve Fund contributions will continue to support our public veterinary program in 2025 as a result of continued success in fundraising and donation efforts. Okay, I'll close by sharing the revised general government 6-year forecast. The good news here is that the 2025 budget is balanced, and the projected deficit for 2026 represents a $10 million reduction from the July snapshot that was shared at the start of this presentation. The 2026 projected deficit is now $7.9 million. We're already working towards reducing the 2026 deficit, applying similar measures that help to balance the 25 budget. Our budget challenges are not over. Even after making multiple reductions for 2025, many of which are permanent reductions, the imbalance between revenues and expenditures is persistent. Property tax, the city's most stable and reliable source of revenue, is limited to a 1% annual growth rate and can't keep up with the rising cost and increased demand for community services. This is the case for most cities across the state, as seen through the many propositions that were placed on the ballot during the last election, which was requested to lift the lid on property tax. Without a revenue solution or more meaningful cap on property tax that recognizes communities' demands for services, the city will need to continue the hard work to address its budget challenges.
And Heidi, just a quick correction. I think you said that the 2026 budget was 7.9 deficit. It's a 6.8 deficit on this slide.
I'm sorry, yes.
Is that, just so we know which number is correct?
It is now 6.8, my apologies. This part
Okay.
had to, we're still, like I said, this is a preliminary balancing, so my
Yeah.
apologies, I didn't update my notes to correlate with the slide, but yes, this is correct, it's a $6.8 million deficit.
Thank you. And I'll just say, although, Heidi shared this is balanced, the reason it's still preliminary is because we haven't finalized all the labor reductions. There's still some back and forth going there, and if we don't achieve the anticipated reductions in certain areas, we'll need to make reductions in other areas, and so just wanted to, it's balanced right now, but we're still working hard to make sure it remains balanced prior to me presenting it to you.
Thank you very much. Questions, council? Councilmember Ryan.
Great. Not so much a question for right now, but I know before when we had talked about budget and staffing, there was the mention about how the FTE per 100,000 residents has gone down over the last 10 years or so. So when the separations are finalized, I'd love to hear what that new ratio level is, because I would assume, went from 7.1 to 6.5, that maybe, it's in even tighter.
Yes, we
Space.
haven't totaled the FTE count for 25 at this point, but according to MRSC, the growth rate between last year's budget, or the population growth, changed from 114,200 to 114,800. So just wanted to refer to that.
And I'd like to pile on that too. I'd like to, as we have these discussions, I think it's important that we compare ourselves to how other like cities are doing. And that would include a full-time employee ratio, and then also the rate, the tax rate. I know we constantly talk about this idea that I think is really important. There's a difference between the assessed valuation and our actual assessment rate. So I think, we should continue to have those comparisons. I appreciate that.
And I'll jump
Yeah.
in on that comparison. The team will work on getting as many close comparisons as we
Sure.
can. The Burke study kind of identified that we're an anomaly, and that we are a very super duper full service city.
Yes.
And so we can take out the enterprise funds and do all that, but we also have fire service, we also have library service, we also have animal shelter. These are programs that other cities don't have. And so our staffing numbers can often be higher than other cities because we provide more services than other cities do. So,
That's
but we'll
why
do
I
our
asked for that
best.
comparison
Yeah,
to be
but
made.
we'll try to get as much information as we can to you.
Yeah, thanks. And then a question about your 2026 forecast. Did that include contributions into the fire and pension fund?
No, that would suspend it in 2026.
Okay, thank you. So that is one pool of money that will continue to dry up, including we won't have any ARPA dollars for 2026 also. Or the limited amount, that is.
Right, there was COVID relief dollars weren't
Yes.
used in this in the balancing.
We did not use those dollars at this time.
We haven't for 2025.
We will need it for 2026.
We will need it for 20.
So there is some ARPA dollars that could be available to help balance the 2026 budget. The other thing I'd like to mention is we also included street overlay a second year in 2026. We carried over that savings as well into the budget deficit you see today. And then, of course, most of the labor savings, some of the labor savings, I don't know yet the percentage, but
We're trying to hold as many of those cuts for as long as possible.
So that's a concern, the overlay, if we continue that next year. Okay, thank you very much. I was just Just a question how you were going to forecast that. Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Tui.
Yeah, Heidi, I have a question on slide 3, when you talk about the budget variance. And I know that the cost of doing business rises and everything, you know, as well as salaries and everything. So, but the budget variance stays just consistent at 7 million throughout moving forward. I mean, should we be adjusting that?
Yes, during the forecast, if there was anything that would imply that we should adjust it, then we would. But for the last 2 years, so this is the '23 budget variance of a little over $7 million. And then the 2022 budget variance to help balance '24 was about 6.9 million. So it's very close to that $7 million estimate, which is why it hasn't been adjusted.
Okay, but over time, like up into 2030, we anticipate that will probably be higher by then, I would think.
And Heidi can probably say this better than I can, although I would say it's possible it would be less, because as we don't increase M&O budgets for our departments, and cost of living goes up and all those costs, it's possible that budget variance could go down. And again, our team does a lot of analysis to determine what that looks like over the next few years, based on historical expenses.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bader.
Thanks, Council President. Could you say a little bit more about your thinking about the ARPA money? I mean, on the one hand, I hear from constituents who say, you know, that's not funding that's going to exist, so don't use it on anything that is more than a one-time thing. On the other hand, I hear from constituents who say, well, why aren't we using ARPA dollars to fill budget holes this year? So I'm just kind of curious if you can.
I'll jump into that, and this is something that I think you all should weigh in on, and will, because you ultimately approve budget. ARPA is one-time dollars, and we have a structural deficit. So using ARPA, you know, if we take 2 million of unallocated ARPA and use that to plug this year's hole, it doesn't really help us because we just have a bigger hole next year. So one-time dollars is like kind of the last thing that I want to do to use to close the budget gap. That being said, I believe we're going to need to use one-time dollars next year to close the budget gap, because the cuts that we've made this year, I can't foresee any way of doing that again next year, because we are cutting deep, we are cutting programs, we are cutting staff, and sustaining most of those cuts into next year, and we still have a deficit. And so I believe we will be kind of backed into a corner next year without a revenue solution, and need to use ARPA funding to close that gap. We took a strategic approach trying to right-size our budget based on the fact that the community said, this is the budget that you have to work with. We received that feedback with Prop 1. So we are right-sizing the budget to deliver services that we can afford to deliver. And that means reducing programs that we all kind of love, but that we can't afford. If I, instead of reducing those programs, used ARPA, I'm just creating a problem. I'm kicking the can down the road for future years. I do believe that we will see a revenue solution at some point, either from the state or through work that we all do up with our community. And so I'm hopeful that the revenue solution can be in place in the near and not distant future. But I think that's why not investing ARPA this year, but having the ability, if you so choose, to invest it next year and not allocating the rest of the unallocated ARPA dollars might be a smart move.
I guess I'll speak for myself, that if we use ARPA dollars to fill budget holes, I'd like to see them, personally, I'd like to see them used for things like street overlay or capital expenditures. Ultimately, we know are going to cost us money if we don't keep up with. So that'd be my personal opinion. Can I keep going with a couple more questions?
Yes,
Okay,
have
thanks.
at it.
Thanks. Heidi, I appreciate the preamble at the beginning, and maybe I'm premature, and this will come in future weeks. But I would like to still would like to see a chart that shows the 10-year change in all of our revenue components. Again, I know property tax is our most stable source and maybe the major one, but I think there's some others that are still significant. So we'll be grateful for that, as well as, the 10-year kind of expenditure chart as well. And again, if those were shown in the last 6, 8, 10 months, I apologize. I have gone through the budget packet, and sometimes I can get it and sometimes I don't. So I can be more specific, or if at some point, if you need me to meet with you to share where my confusion is, I'm happy to do that. So.
And our next budget meeting is next week, and that will go over, that's our revenue workshop. So this is more of balancing, and we'll go more in detail on revenues.
Gotcha. Okay. And final question, can you speak, or can someone speak to the impact of grants we get and how, in general, that impacts budget planning? I mean, obviously, something, a good example would be, I think, at least if I heard this correctly at the library board meeting, was the hotspots, that those came about because the library received a grant initially. Then I think last year they funded it from their own budget, but it kind of now bit us because now we can't afford to. I don't know if you want to speak to those kind of grants in general.
I believe it was the Federal Communications Commission that received ARPA dollars, and that funded the federal program that offered those connectivity resources, and that's what the library received.
Right. But in terms of maybe a kind of more broader statement about how we approach budgeting where there are grants involved.
I'll jump in on that
Thanks.
too, and Heidi can elaborate, but we work to get grants in all our departments: parks, community development, obviously infrastructure. Public Works gets the majority of our grants in transportation. A lot of those grants drive what projects we can do. And so in transportation and Public Works, we shift to do this part of our, I'm gonna get it wrong, sorry, Ryan, but our sidewalk development or whatever, based on that we've got a grant where we can do that work in this area, but we don't have a grant somewhere else. And so sometimes it drives our work, but we keep applying for those other areas as well. I'll use the community development team as an example. We have seen a dramatic increase in needs for us to provide services to people experiencing mental health, behavioral health issues, challenges of homelessness, substance use disorder, and they're calling on lots of city resources in a very intensive amount of time, whether it's in jail or with a co-ed team or people asking us to clear encampments. And so trying to get dollars to invest in alleviating that problem, that issue in our community, has been a priority. We've been successful in getting a lot of funding for that. As Heidi shared, the $4.5 million grant from SAMHSA, fantastic. That was thanks to Senator Murray. That is used to pay for the services that we're providing. You are correct. At the end of some amount of time, that grant will go away and people will expect us to be able to continue this program. We don't chase grants to develop programs. We see where there's a need that we're trying to address, and then we get grant funding to do it. So it helps us do what the community's asking us to do, but we do fall off a cliff at some point because we've been able to grow a little bit in areas thanks to grant funding, and then people expect to continue to receive that, and that might go away. We got the COPS grant to fund additional police officers, right? It was a need the community kept asking for, additional officers, so we got the grant to do that. At some point, that grant will go away, and then we are responsible for those officers' salaries, right? So but we really work, the staff team that works to apply for funding, I always call it, there's organizations that do money chasing and then they shift their mission based on that. We don't do that. We have a mission that we're trying to accomplish, whether it's building these parks or paving these roads, and we look for funding to help us. And we've been very successful under the last, 6-7 years in getting additional grant dollars. And we're going to continue to invest in that area to try to bring in as much outside support as possible. But it is risky too when they go away.
I guess I just want to make sure our constituents understand the impact of it. There's advantages to doing that, but then ultimately we do have an impact. Thank you.
There's a good example recently with our bike paths, that we had a lot of concern about how the city has budget challenges and we're spending money on bike paths. And even though they were given a grant for it, so,
And it's part of our bicycle master plan.
right, so,
A project we prioritized, so we said we'd seek grant funding for it, we got grant funding for it, we implemented it. Yeah.
any other questions? Councilmember Ryan?
Great, thank you. So, kind of revisiting the COVID dollars conversation about one-time dollars, some of the conversations I've been hearing at neighborhood meetings is questions about fund balance and how fund balance has been spent these last few years, and then how that kind of factors into balancing our budget coming down the pike. So I was hoping just to open it up for comments or a commentary about that.
Sure. With every budget, we ensure that the revenues that we're budgeting for, our ending fund balance is equivalent to 20% of that, and that's really required by our policy. Not only developing the 25 budget, we have to look at the 24 forecast as well, knowing that there's budget amendments that take place. When identifying the budget variance, in that calculation is ensuring that we are also meeting our 2024 ending fund balance requirement. So we're not carrying forward any additional funds that we can't because we need, by law, need to be within a balanced budget, and then by our internal policy, remain within our 20% requirement.
Thank you. And I think there was a recommendation from Mike about a council discussion about like the minimum and the maximum percent for appropriate fund balance spread. So it's, not a time right now for that conversation, but I just wanted to make a mention of it to make sure it didn't fall off our radar.
The budget, and that's, you're tying that to the budget variance, because some cities have a very large percentage. Ours is limited to 20, but that varies per city, but our current policy is 20. I have considered that idea about adjusting the budget variance, but once again, it's just a one-time. It's just a one-time, that's it, and I don't think we're at that point yet, or that's something I'd want to consider. Yeah,
That would be another statistic I'd be interested in, if I haven't communicated that already, that fund balance over maybe the last 10 years. Especially, did we see a significant bump up in the fund balance due to monies we were holding that came in through the pandemic or what have you? I don't know if I understand that or not. I tried to follow it in our budget book, but not sure I did, so would be grateful for that info. Thanks.
Councilmember Zarlingo.
Well, I want to thank you, first of all, you, Heidi, and your team with respect to describing some of the impacts of some of the changes, because I think I was not the only council member in talking with our community members through the spring and summer and discussions in this, and that you're sort of voting on what sort of city you want to have and the trade-offs you have. So I appreciate those impacts. I'll use that as well. I also appreciate some of the comparisons, because I don't think I nor our community members really know or have in mind a magic number for what's the appropriate level of taxation overall in property taxes. I think they see that those property taxes have gone up. They know a lot of it goes to the schools. They don't really know what's a perfect number. So some of the comparisons, as much as they are applicable with other cities, and I appreciated in particular the one that described, that compared us when weighing in especially the fire and library, and then animal shelter and things like that. So both in terms of the number of FTEs and in terms of some of those tax rates, I guess I'd like to encourage you to continue to keep in mind those relative things. If you can give us a sense of that, that allows us to communicate with our community members to give them the best idea they can have about the recent decision on the nature of the city and its finances and future decisions like that. Because I think that's the only way we're going to get people feeling like they're appropriately informed and served. It's not an easy thing, and I understand you will not have perfect comparisons. And of course, we hear questions about things like, for example, transit and community transit, but that's funded from a sales tax. And there are questions or there are decisions that will come up with that if we look into consolidation. So sorry, I'm wandering a little bit, but my point is generally that those relative comparisons, even if they are imperfect, we do appreciate those. Those help us communicate better and get feedback about those choices, and then informs future ones.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you guys get through your presentation. Was there, okay, there wasn't another speaker or anything? Okay, just making sure. Good. Any other, we got a couple more minutes. Any other questions or comments from council? Okay, well, I guess I didn't have to ask the earlier question then. Okay, at this time, we'll complete today's budget meeting, so thank you very much.